Hi Kala, good evening. Hi Rajni, good evening.
Hi. Sorry, I'll switch on my camera. I am like down. मेरे को ना
Yeah,
network किधर भी नहीं मिल रहा है. So I had
no,
to. I will switch on. Don't worry. So
yeah.
momently I will switch on for you. I'll switch on the camera.
Hi Anil, good evening. Hi Vitesh, very good evening.
Hi, Pradeep.
Hi, Sai. Good evening.
How are you, Vitesh?
All well. So far, so good.
Great,
Been a
great.
long day.
We are have you among us today. We'll just wait for another 2-3 minutes for people to join in.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, just
I
give me
see a
one
bandage
sec.
on your
Sorry, go on.
right hand. I see a bandage on your right hand. Is everything all?
Yeah. It's just a sports injury. Screwed up
Oh,
my
oh,
wrist.
oh,
So yeah, so just
okay.
give me one sec.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, I'm back. We want to give folks a little more time to join.
Yes, Vitesh. Just
Sure,
another 2 minutes.
sure thing. Hi, Kala.
Hi.
You're killing it on the quizzes. Are you like taking notes, or do you have some inside information that the rest of us
No,
would do well
I
to have?
wish I had. I wish I had. I was. No, no. Just I don't know. I think now it's like more performance pressure.
Yeah, I mean you've set the bar now. So
So now I'm scared of every Friday. So like I don't know now. Let's see.
yeah, it'll come back to bite you during appraisal times, right? Ah, you didn't match that one.
And it's the beginning of the year, right? So I'll have to remember
Yeah,
it throughout.
yeah.
But yeah. No, but it's a good session because many things. I mean, I've been in the system for last 1 year, but many things I didn't know. Like it is existing, and we have the capacity, capabilities of doing it. So I
Yeah,
think,
actually, a lot of those are also quite an eye opener for me as well.
yeah. So I was like, wow, this is also possible. Yeah.
So, Sai, let us know when we're ready to start.
Yes, Vitesh. We are at time now. People will keep on joining in. So let's begin with the session. So good evening, everyone. Myself, Sai Pratik, and it's my pleasure to extend a cheerful welcome to you all for today's session with Vitesh. So today's agenda will be Vitesh will be walking us through the market modeling, and then we will have some question discussions, and then we will be open to questions for Vitesh from the audience. To give a quick introduction about myself, I am Sai Pratik and I joined Kara in August 2022 after my bachelor's degree in engineering. So, coming to the rest of today's discussion, it will be based around market mix modeling. And we have with us today Vittesh Kalambi, who is the principal partner at Dentsu X India. Uh, to say we are thrilled to have you with us is an understatement. So let's begin with Vitesh's intro. So Vitesh has over 18 years of experience in research and analytics, both in India as well as in the US. He is passionate about innovation and streamlining processes. He has been instrumental in developing and executing complex cross-functional projects and solutions in global category management, business transformation, and also team management. To talk about the sectors, the his work spans across several sectors, including FMCG, consumer, healthcare, retail, hospitality, consulting, building high performing teams, and all of this with a singular focus aligned to customer satisfaction and growth. Here is a very uh, great insight about Vitesh is like he is a rocket scientist by training. His experience spans a variety of roles on both sides of the curtain. He was a student researcher at Georgia Tech, and he was in consulting associated with CEB, AMI Partners, and Genpact, and also at agencies like Absolute Data, and also in client organizations. Most recently, he was the head of analytics at GSK Consumer Healthcare for the Indian subcontinent. So, Vitesh, I just wanted to ask you about your shift from technical background to analytical, and do you have any recommendations for someone who is on the same journey or on the same lines?
Well, welcome everyone, and firstly to Megha, if you're on the call, thanks so much for the opportunity. It's great to see the turnout, and hopefully I can add some value to this discussion. But yeah, I mean, in terms of, so honestly, I'm not really a tech guy, right? So the whole master's thing and everything was initially I went to the US thinking that I wanted to do a master's in aerospace design. Very soon I figured out the fact that to work in the aerospace industry in the US, you kind of need a certain level of security clearance, which someone who went on a student visa is likely to get only when they're close to retirement. So pretty quickly, I kind of tailored my courses, took the decision early on to make my coursework a little more quantitatively inclined rather than on the aerospace side. So while I have done classes and everything on aerospace design and all that, the focus was more around avionics, which required a lot of human factors in terms of understanding. There was a quantitative thesis as well that we did. So I think I wouldn't necessarily say that it's been a transition from tech to analytics. In fact, right now, so initially when I started, uh, it was more around doing a lot of the analytics. I started as a quantitative analyst and all that stuff in primary research, moved into pure play analytics at some point, about 7-8 years in. And now it's actually the reverse of what you're saying, right? It's so while I have a lot of those fundamentals around statistical analysis and the methodologies and all that, it's only in recent years where I've been kind of catching up on the tech aspect of analytics, right? Because tech is one of the principal enablers of taking the analytics and making it actionable and making it that much more tangible for business users to help drive their thinking, shape their tactical and their strategic decision making. Right. So it's one thing to just put an equation and create a model and create a PPT. It's quite
Okay.
another thing to actually bring that to life using technology-based enablers. Like you'll create a what-if tool, create a decision-making tool, you'll create optimization tools, and broadly speaking, just decision aids. And that's where the actual value of analytics lies, right? Which
Absolutely.
is that I have something in my hands now, which I can play around with. I can keep running, different sorts of scenarios, whatever comes to mind. If it's able to handle that, then great, right? And very often, a lot of analytics agencies tend to give short shrift to that part of it because typically as modelers, as data scientists and all of that, we tend to think that, hey, creating fancy ass models, statistical models, whatever, however, you know, so like if you take chat GPT, for instance, as an example, right? It's AI, it's ML, whatever it is, right? Um, it wouldn't have been the same if it didn't have an interface for you to play with, right? Someone could have very well bandied on the fact that, hey, we've got this awesome algorithm that can do these five things. But where the actual buzz, right, has been generated because people have something to work with and understand how the analytics is working, how it's coming to life, how it's changing your way of thinking, and that's where it is. So broadly speaking, it's not about changing a line from tech to analytics or analytics to tech. It's the fact that the two of them are so intrinsically connected that you as a professional need to understand what the advantages and the disadvantages of both sides are, figure out where you want to be in that ecosystem, and then work towards that.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Vittesh, for shedding some light over that topic. And now coming to his previous roles in the market research services at the Analytics Center of Excellence at Genpact. He was instrumental in building the RightShore backend operations for Dynata, now known as erstwhile research in India. And also, he led the marketing effectiveness, sales, and digital analytics practice at Absolute Data. Coming to his hobbies, outside working hours, his time is largely consumed by his soon to be 7-year-old daughter and his love towards cooking and experimenting with different foods and cuisines. And he is also a trained semi-trained chef from CIA, which is not the CIA which you are thinking. It's Culinary Institute of America in New York. And also he loves playing guitar along with his band. And he also has an active sporting life, which is very evident. Just that for others were joined. Vittesh has a sports injury on his right arm. If you have noticed that, wishing him a speedy recovery on that. So, Vittesh, just a little curious as to know if your retirement plans entail opening a restaurant by putting your hobby into practice.
Um, in a nutshell, yes. Right. It's initially, so I was in the US till about 2010, and that's kind of when the bug hit. And I moved back to India. At least my wife and I at that time. We moved back to India with the thought that I wanted to open a restaurant, and she wanted to open her own architecture practice. So with all good intentions, we moved back to India, not really aware, of uh, what there is already. Even though I was like a market researcher, I hadn't done any sort of research on the restaurant industry here. Just visas running out, packed our bags, left, came back. Right. And this was also roughly around the time when the world was facing the onslaught or the aftermath of the whole Lehman Brothers meltdown, recessions everywhere, blah blah blah. So yes, that was the initial plan, right? Then we came back and we found that, hey, India's not as cheap as we thought it was. It's still pretty crazy expensive. And that got us thinking a little bit. And then we decided it doesn't make sense for, both of us, even though we didn't have a kid at that time. It didn't make sense for both of us to be in startup mode. That would have meant cutting a fair amount of corners on lifestyle and things like that. So, which at that time we were not really ready to do. So, then I said, okay, we've got this research and analytics kind of experience. Let's just leverage that for the time being, and work towards the restaurant part of it. So yes, eventually, honestly speaking, that is the plan once I retire. But given the way things are right now, if I get to spend even 6 months in a restaurant, be it mine or somebody else's, I'm happy. Just saying, hey, yes, I've been part of the restaurant. I've been part of the back end, and that's it. That would be the last check on the bucket list.
Great, great, great. Hope that is accomplished at some point of your life, and we'll be pleased to visit the restaurant and have the experience. Over to you, Vittesh, for the presentation on market mix model.
Sure. So I'm just going to share. I don't have too many slides. I'm quickly going to just share my screen and just walk everyone through. I'll show a couple of slides, and then since we are going to be specifically talking mainly about market mix modeling, I'll just talk about at a highish sort of a level, MMMs broadly speaking, right? So essentially, what is an MMM, right? Now, given that we're a media agency, it is very tempting for us to. So, Sai, can I just ask you if there are questions in between? Yeah, just because I'm projecting, I can't see anything. So, just stop me in the middle if needed. Yeah,
sure.
I'd love to keep this interactive. So, broadly speaking, when we talk about MMMs, as a media agency, it's very tempting for us to take the first M as media, right? And that, of course, while that fits in with the concept of media effectiveness and understanding which media is working best for me, to understand the true impact that media actually has on the overall business. It needs to be, you need to look at as much of the ecosystem as possible, right? So if you look at the ones in blue, those are your very typical internal levers, which, in MMM parlance, and when I say MMM, I'm talking about market mix model, right? Otherwise, I'll say media mix. In MMM parlance, typically these are what we would consider to be discretionary activities, right? Like, so if I'm talking about media, it's my choice whether I want to do media, whether I don't want to do media. If it's pricing, right? Be it the brand, be it the competition, be it the category, it's my decision. It's my discretionary decision to decide, do I want to take price? Do I want to understand the impact that price has on my business, etc. It's in my control. And then on the flip side of it, you've got typically those uncontrollable. It's not in your hand, but those are market forces that are driving your business in some way or the other. Some of them directly, some of them indirectly. So things like, seasonality, macroeconomic fluctuations, no control, but we know it does have an impact. Similarly with the competition, I can't control what my competition does. What I can do is keep an eye on what they're doing and try to understand how that kind of fits into the effects and the impacts that I as a brand am facing. Similarly, there's category trends, ad hoc events. There's a lot of stuff that you can put in. Yeah? I mean, when you're talking about MMMs, you can potentially even segregate that down to looking at it from a B2B versus the B2C model, right? You could bring it specifically down to just one category. You can take it to higher levels where you look at it at a portfolio level, right? And the true beauty of something like market mix models is that it is based on historical data, right? So there's no there's no gut feel here. It is purely based on executions that have happened, goings on that have happened in the marketplace, in the categories, etc. Getting all that information and applying, based on the information that you have, it is applying robust statistical models for us to be able to tease out and isolate the impacts that each of these levers have. So typically, when we look at I will come back to the slide. So if you look at something like this, the graph on the left-hand side, right? This is a typical output that you would see from market mix models. Now, what this means is the blue bars that you have is what is called the baseline, right? And the easiest definition of something like this would be that this is the amount of business that I would expect to do were I not doing any discretionary incremental activities like media or pricing for my products, right? And while this shows a bit of a flipping here, typically what happens is if you don't do the reason why we do media, why we do have a lot of these other marketing interventions like activations and consumer promotions, etc., is simply because we want to ensure that our baseline, while there is growth that can be unlocked as a result of doing those marketing activities, you also want to protect your baseline because eventually the baseline will erode if you as a business don't have any marketing interventions to let the world know that, hey, we are here, this is what we stand for, and here are some products that we have, and all the communications and the creative and everything that's associated with that, right? So that's the general idea behind it. And when we look at market mix models, if you just talking about what I have on the right hand side, right? It speaks very, very closely to the kind of decisions that I might want to make, right? Typical question would be that how much should I spend on TV, right? No, I don't want to spend on TV. Let me reduce TV, but let me up my digital. So by how much, and what is the basis for that? So the equations that are derived, right? The way optimization algorithms are then configured based on the outputs that you get from these quantitative equations is what helps me either understand if I have a specific growth target, right? Then what is my budget sufficiency? How much budget do I need to be able to hit that KPI? If I'm targeting an 8% growth or a 10% growth or a 12% growth, then do I have enough budget to suffice for that growth? And if I do have some of that budget, then what is the best and the most optimal way for me to mix up my incremental levers? How much should I spend on distribution? How much should I spend on price? How much should I spend on all my media activities and on consumer promotions for me to be able to come close or even exceed that target? Right. A flip side to that conversation is basically saying or realizing the fact that we cannot have as deep pockets as the MMM might suggest. So we're given a budget, and the idea now is to be able to optimize that budget based on these equations and the response curves, which then tells us, hey, with the budget that you're talking about and with the highest optimality that can be attained from the models, this is the kind of a target, this is the kind of a KPI achievement that we could expect. Okay, right? And the third part is essentially what we call custom simulations, saying that, okay, I may not necessarily want to run an optimal budget. I have a certain budget spend in mind or a media mix in mind. Let me just put that into the equations and see how that works out, right? So these are essentially with MMMs, these are the three principal questions that businesses tend to ask. And typically most analytics service providers worth their salt would provide a optimization tool, and how the tool is deployed is a separate matter. But they would provide an optimization tool which lets you play around and figure out, answers to these three principal questions. Now, while on this slide on the left-hand side, I have shown, we're looking at media, TV, digital, or price, brand, competition, category. The true value of this actually lies in the level of granularity that each of these can be broken into. So, for example, in my market mix model, when I take TV, for instance, right, I can do a secondary level model, right, which now breaks down TV into different types of channel genres, or I can break it down into types of day parts or ACDs, and whatever level of granularity that you want. Um, if the data is able to stand up to it and you have data at that level of granularity, you can test for those effects and the impacts that it could drive in your market mix model. So when I'm saying price, I can look at, overall for a product, I can look at it from an overall level, saying that, hey, let's say I have Iodex as a brand. Iodex overall brand pricing, I can get good understanding of. At the same time, I can also go down to very granular levels, saying that, the Iodex 5-gram pack or the Iodex 20-gram pack or the Iodex 30-gram pack, how is that pricing relative to the market, relative to the competition, relative to the category? And I can now inform a lot more of my pricing, my pricing calendar, my pricing structure itself, right? Just to give you a couple of ideas of how pricing through market mix models can be used. Similarly, if we're talking about the external levers like seasonality, competition, of course, as a brand, there's not much you can do to influence external factors. But what you can do is when you are creating your own budgets and your KPI targets and all of that, you will take into consideration the effects of those external factors, which now gives you a much better sense and a much more real sense of where your outputs would lie. So the competitive angle, the market forces angle is as critical as you understanding how your media mix needs to be allocated, for specific targets that you want or budget sufficiency that you want. Any questions? Happy to answer, or I can just keep rambling on. Okay. Um, so I think one of the other questions that Megha had forwarded to me was around limitations of MMMs, right? So now when we're talking about limitations, these are the four most clear limitations that we need to keep in mind. Apart from the fact that MMMs can be very nuanced, right? So it's not as sometimes it's not as simple as saying, hey, this is the elasticity or this is the ROI of each of the levers and this is our optimized mix. The businesses will always have questions saying, how did that come about? Are all the levers significant? Or are all the levers not significant? If you are taking us, if you are, if your budget has maxed out in terms of return for all the significant levers, then on what basis do you allocate any leftover budget to the lesser significant levers, right? Marketing interventions. So there's a number of questions that can come up as a result of that. So that's just the point that it's pretty nuanced. So you know, when presenting to clients, uh, initially at least, it is recommended that you actually have someone who understands the modeling, who understands the pros and cons of a marketing mix model, to be able to at least put the client to some level of assurance. Um, so key points, limitations of MMMs typically would be that it's of course based on historical data. Now, the fact, because it's based on historical data, you need a certain number of years of a product being in the market, because every product goes through a maturity cycle, right? So as a result of that, and typically, at least in FMCG and other product categories, what the industry in general has noticed is that typically you start seeing stability in the product around the 30 to 36 month range. So it is typically uh, it's typically recommended that you have at least a 36 month data time frame of existence of that product to be able to run the MMM. Right. Um, Again, let's bear in mind the fact that uh, when media activities happen or consumer promotions happen or any specific pushes on distribution happen or pricing happens, all of these are being done in tandem, right? None of these, typically you will not find these things being done in isolation of each other. So it's happening simultaneously. Sometimes we call it surround, where you have three, four different types of customer touch points being in action at the same time. So MMMs typically, while it does do an isolation of the individual impact that each of the that each of your levers has, uh, the general recommendation is to not view these in isolation of each other, right? So there's no sense in me just putting TV as a variable and saying, hey, what is my impact of TV? You've got to look at it from a surround perspective. And when you're looking at the actionability of it, you've also got to take into consideration that you cannot really cherry pick and say that, hey, radio or digital has the highest ROI, so I am going to push 80% of my spend on digital and radio. That doesn't make sense, because eventually what does happen is that each of the levers has what is typically called a response curve or an S curve. And you get a point at the top of that curve beyond which you're really not realizing any ROI for any amount of investment that's put in. So you obviously want to operate as close to that top as you can, that point of inflection where your ROI starts dropping, and try not to go beyond that. So the MMMs for each lever, it will give you a typical S curve, which identifies a floor and a ceiling. And the recommendation is that you should be operating within that as much as possible for each of the levers that you have. And when you run an optimization, it takes into account these floor and ceiling limits, and then puts all of that together to identify the maximized uplift. Right. A third thing that you have for MMMs as a limitation would be typically they tend to be more short to medium in timeline. So if I create a model today, it would potentially work for maybe the next 12, 9, 12, 15 months at best. And this is typically a rule of thumb that one would use specifically for FMCG categories. For other categories, it could depend on the nature of the business, nature of the category, how quickly and how fast moving that particular category could be, right? So uh, broadly speaking, rule of thumb is that consider refreshing the models every 12 to 15 months. Right? Um, and of course, given that it is statistically driven, uh, they are not intended for running simulations or scenarios where you're looking at hypergrowth. When you're saying hypergrowth, you're saying, hey, my target is to grow my brand 3x, 4x, 5x over the next year or the next 2 years. Simply because once you go beyond a specific level, every model will have a certain amount of error that is uh, an outcome of statistics not being able to explain 100% of the variation in your data. So, as a rule of thumb, one of the benchmarks that are used with MMMs is that you typically don't want to consider the MMM for situations where your targets are beyond 30 to 35% of historical bases and peaks observed by the model for each of the levers, right? And the last but not the least is the fact that MMMs don't have context, right? They don't have creative context or creative quality. So while it can tell me that a particular campaign, right? So my favorite example, uh, let's say you got the Vanilla Lychee campaign, right? An MMM for Vanilla Lychee will probably tell me that, hey, this particular campaign that you ran in 2021 and 22 was by far your best campaign in terms of the effectiveness, the volumetric effectiveness that it drove, and in terms of the ROI, right? Which is great. But what the MMM will not tell me is the reason why that ad campaign worked. So it will not be able to tell me that it was the presence of Ajay Devgan and or it was the presence of Ajay Devgan plus Shah Rukh Khan and or there was Devgan, Shah Rukh Khan and Akshay Kumar. And that's the reason why the ad is such a stupendous success. Right? It does not go down to that level. That said, right, there are potentially ways in which creatives can be judged through statistical means. But what this means is that there needs to be a very clearly defined lexicon for tagging each of the creatives, um, such that it is a lexicon that goes across all campaigns. Right. So there is a basis. There is a language basis with thematic elements which are true or false of each campaign, which you can then create the data around and test for that. That said, that is potentially a manual task, and it is a bit of an odious, a very tedious task, should I say. So most people don't tend to do that. When it comes to testing ad campaigns or creative quality and all that, a lot of folks tend to do it in a different way by either using, Link as a test, as a test environment, or running animatics and just general copy or general ad testing that we would use, digital or offline, which is outside the scope of a typical MMM, right? Um, and this part, the equity mix model, is something that this is like an extension of market mix models. Now, typically, when we look at market mix models, you would look at the baseline and you say, hey, there's parts of the baseline, typically which would consist of, let's say, distribution, competitive pricing, category effects, macroeconomics, and brand equity, right? But the concept of brand equity here is just, a single nebulous little concept. Whereas what we do know in reality is that there are a lot of things which actually drive brand equity, and it also drives funnel behavior, right? Things like the salience, your affinity, uh, how well you're being considered, a lot of the imagery that a brand would be tracking over time. And what the equity mix model helps us do is essentially most market mix models focus on the part that is outside this yellow box, right? Looking at how we can optimize for our media, optimize for our consumer promotions. What equity mix model actually looks at is the baseline part of it. So in almost like almost one of the benchmarks, another benchmark I'm throwing out there is the fact that in most FMCG related baselines, between 50 to 55, 56% of the base of the overall sales, right, is explained by the baseline. Right. So there is a massive that's a massive part of it's a massive part of the business where typically marketers tend not to focus on, because either there's the thinking that, hey, this is something that we can't control, or it's like ye sales ka kaam hai, distribution sales ka kaam hai, hamara kaam hai. So if we want to actually you know give the business that more holistic view, right? One of the additional incremental methodologies that we at NCO have developed is the EMN, which helps us deconstruct that baseline, right? Understand the drivers of equity, deconstruct the baseline more in terms of deep dives on distribution, long-term effects of media, long-term effects of uh, you know uh, all the brand equity measures that we have on the baseline, and thereby what that's helping with is creating a more sustainable base for the brand and the product eventually, right? So it's telling us that it's telling us where one should focus, what sorts of imagery one might want to focus on, and essentially this feeds into the general concept of a brand structure analysis, which is another thing. So it's kind of like a companion to the EML. But the brand structure analysis would look purely just at how your brand is structured in terms of imagery and consideration and typical brand metrics. Where the EMM has a leg up is that it is used in conjunction with a typical market mix model to be that much more holistic in understanding what needs to be driven, how you need to drive it, and what touch points you need to be able to leverage to be able to drive it. Right? So broadly speaking, on MMMs, I think uh, that's roughly what I wanted to cover. I mean, there's a lot more about MMMs that I can keep going till the cows come home. But I just wanted to take a pause there. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions that folks will have. So we'll just take a pause there, and if you guys have questions, let's go for it.
Yes, Vitesh. So we had initially circled amongst the team and had few questions ready with us. So we'll be taking them. So one question was like this: that the pricing teams at a brand do it at a global level. They set prices according to a country, like a specific product. Say McDonald's. This burger is priced at this for $100, say in India, but that
Yeah,
is priced around $2 in the states or something like that.
yeah, yeah.
So can it broken down into further granularity, saying in metro cities, a packet of biscuit can be priced higher, so that people don't even bother much, like. And the tier 3, tier 4 cities, the prices can be cheaper. Will this approach be of any help, since MMM can provide this data?
Yes and no. Right. What I mean by that is the thing to understand is that there is a pretty heavy dependence on the way the markets are structured. Right. So if I take the example of India as a heterogeneous market, and what I mean by heterogeneous market is that uh, there there are regional differences, there are cultural differences, right? And the predominant form of the predominant form of the market structure is traditional trade, right? So the way distribution happens is quite different. Not everybody has the same level of distribution capabilities. That's why you have HUL, being like this behemoth in distribution, and that's where they can leverage it with their distributors. Now, coming to your question, the key thing to understand, one is because of the way the Indian economy is one structured. Two is the fact that we in India are an uh, MRP driven economy, right? So every good service product that's out there um, has an MRP. Now, a retailer will always want to sell it at MRP unless the retailer knows that, hey, there's something new coming in. I need to create shelf space. So I'm going to sell it at a discount. But that discount means that the retailer is eating into his or her own margins. Right. Um, so typically with India, because it is MRP driven, it is very, very difficult, right? For regular stuff like biscuits, FMCG stuff that you get at the department store, it's very difficult for one to have a stratified pricing by state or by region, because the minute that happens, right, what you as a strategy will need to do, you'll need to earmark certain areas, right, and clusters of geographical clusters where everything will have to be the same price. Otherwise, you run the risk of having cross-border, cross-border, goods flowing, right, and that kind of gives rise to a bit of a black market. So
Just doesn't.
that's the way it is. Right. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense for, ITC to say that, hey, in Karnataka, we're going to sell cigarettes for $400 because taxes are higher there. And in Bengal, we're going to sell it for, $270 because it's a much cheaper state. You're going to start seeing some cross-border stuff happening in whatever way, right? So that's one of the deterrents, the barriers to having a stratified pricing. Where you can get around something like that, right, is through your product portfolio. Now, that if there are places where they're price sensitive, and you really cannot, if you've got a packet of bourbon biscuits, right, you can't sell it for more than $10. Sometimes with a lot of these things, there is a magical price point. In some products, it's 5 rupees. In some products, it's 10 rupees. So it doesn't make sense to have something at 11 rupees or 9 rupees, because then you run into change issues, right? Hopefully, that's going forward. That's not going to be too much of a problem because of UPI. But that used to be the case about 5, 7, 8, 10 years ago. Now, if there are areas which we know are price-wise a lot more sensitive, right, and in terms of income, there's a lot of disparity, then what companies will do is they will create new packs with a different brand name, right, and make those available. So taste-wise, you might not really see any difference, but you will see those sorts of packs being found. So if you wanted, let's say, Lay's chips, right, in Delhi, yeah, you will get it everywhere. Everyone will be selling it for $10 or $15, depending on the size. But that very Lay's chips will have that same yellow, will have a different name to it. And you go to some small place near, let's say, Jhajjar in Haryana, or a smaller town or a smaller village around there, that same packet you will get for $6 or $7.
Oh.
Right. The goods inside are the same, but it's a different pack. So that's how a lot of companies tend to get around this whole pricing issue. Right.
Okay.
Tracking it becomes a nightmare, but they typically have systems in place to be able to track it. Right. And now this is in stark contrast to the way things are, let's say, in the US and UK, right? Because there they have dynamic pricing, where your prices could change on a daily basis, it could change on a weekly basis. And the same packet of chips that you buy from a CVS today might cost you $3. Tomorrow, it will still cost you $3. Next week, when you go, they could have reduced price to $250, or they could have increased it to $375. right? It all depends on terms of trade. It depends on how volumes are picking up. It depends on seasonality. If there are events or something coming by, and a lot of companies have very specific pricing departments, right, which are continuously doing this. They're continuously looking at a recommended retail price, right? They will tell. So the way distribution typically happens through in the US, for instance, is through what is called key accounts, right? So if I am Mondelez, I will have key accounts with, let's say, Walmart or Walgreens and a lot of other, Kroger, you name the thing, right? Um, I will have specific terms of trade with each of them separately, which will now allow me to say that my pricing for my goods that you would buy at CVS versus what you would buy at Walgreens versus what you would buy at some other retailer will be different. So that's how they typically handle it. They're able to do it because over there is no concept of MRP. By the way, Sai, you're on mute. Um, there's no concept of MRP. There's a recommended retail price.
Thank you so much.
Does that answer it? Long-winded
Yes,
answer, but hopefully.
very much, very detailed. Yeah. So another thing, is there any of course we don't know the technicalities of MMM. So just was curious to know if there is a certain way to inculcate customer satisfaction data and gauge or gauge or make informed decisions and drive growth in the future for a particular brand.
Customer satisfaction. See, yes, you can. You can include it, right? You can include it in your MMM. But the complexity now becomes, just adding something as a data point into your model versus actually saying, what do I make of it going forward, right? Because uh, typically what would happen is, let's say I have CSAT data and I pull that into my model. Now, my model will tell me, hey, this is the impact that CSAT had on your brand, right? On your sales or whatever KPI you have in place. The question now becomes that, is CSAT really something that I can optimize around? Is it an input metric or is it an output metric? Right. So this is another complexity within MMMs where you need to be very clear about the nature of the data that you're putting in. Is it an input? Is it an output? Is it a derived metric or is it a native metric? Right. And what I mean by native is something which is the data itself. Right. A derived metric would be something like, let's say, a share of voice or a share of expense or a share of marketing expense, things like that, or market share even. Right. So it's one thing to say that, hey, you can, from a statistical point of view, you can include it in your models. The problem becomes that when you're doing an optimization, when you're saying that there needs to be a certain amount of spend that is happening, right? How do I bring CSAT into the picture there? Because CSAT is an outcome of various actions that I have taken as a brand or a product or a company. So the more pertinent question would be that these are the things I've done to drive CSAT, right? So here's what I need to do. So instead of CSAT being on the right-hand side of my model equation, it probably makes more sense to have CSAT on the left-hand side of the equation and leave that as the outcome. In which case, from a statistical standpoint, you create what are called cascading models, right? Where you first test the impact of your marketing on CSAT, you test it on other brand metrics, and then you cascade those outputs into your final business KPI, which would be either sales or revenue, volume sales or revenue sales, as the case may be. So yes, mathematically, there are ways to do it. It all comes down to how you're going to use it and what the model outcome is actually telling you, the actionability behind it, so to speak.
Okay. Thank you so much for answering our query. And this is a more generic or a general question, not related to MMM, but just considering the technological advancement in data and analytics.
Hmm.
And spoken about Chat GPT also in the beginning of our conversation. So a particular use case of Chat GPT is phenomenal that it can even deliver you media plans in form of text, right? So,
Hmm.
coming way forward, what will be your recommendation to keep up with the technology and not lose our jobs?
Oh, this is kind of like an existential question, right? um, okay. First off, I must admit that as far as on a personal viewpoint, right? Chat GPT, AI, all of this stuff is, I don't believe it is going to replace us, right? What it is essentially going to do is, a chat GPT is not going to be, AI is not going to be able to give you, um, or rather, let me put it this way, where humans have a leg up over AI, right, is that we can understand and we can bring in uh, that emotional thinking
Correct.
and that contextual sensitivity, which an AI will not be able to, right? And let's bear in mind that an AI typically is trained on past data, right? So fundamentally, what will happen is it can pull together a lot of things that have previously existed and give you a viewpoint about it. It can give you a lot of information that you did not know previously existed for you to be able to make a decision. But if an AI is going to start giving me a decision to make, I will be a little skeptical about it, right? Because first I would want to check and see that have all the contextual sensitivities been taken into account. And an AI typically will, it works as a black box, right? So if my client wants to understand on what basis have you come up with this media mix, I can't tell him, hey, ChatGPT told me so, right? And I don't understand how ChatGPT works. So I don't have that validation for me to say that, this is a damn good media mix. And I know what impact this sort of a media mix is going to happen. So yes, I think there are definite uh, there are definite upsides, right, to AI and all of that. For me, the jury is still out in terms of how that needs to be used to, to when you want to start layering in emotion, human thinking, as well as outcomes that have previously never happened. And that's one thing with MMMs also, right? Is that if there is a media touch point that has previously never been activated or never been leveraged, it cannot give you an opinion on that because it is always based on previous data. For understanding a bit more of the future, you've got to think about more, how should I put it, more innovative ways, right? Like through survey research and things like that, and understand how that can be incorporated into your way of thinking uh, when you're coming up with media plans. So the majority of the work in terms of a media plan can be done by MMMs. There will always be that futuristic element of it, which an MMM will not be able to tell you. And I believe that holds true for AI as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That was the main reason why customer satisfaction implement fluxing it with MMM is also difficult because
Yeah,
it's based
it is.
on feeling.
It
Yeah,
is. And on the CSAT front, I think I'm not entirely convinced that uh, so see, the concept of CSAT has also changed significantly. I think this is one of the questions that Nate had also sent to me is uh, when we talk about CSAT, how do you interpret CSAT as a construct, right? Maybe 7-10 years ago, there was this entire concept of NPS, right? Net Promoter Score, which a lot of companies would do. They had developed what they called NPS corridors, and brought it right down to the point where it was a KRA or a KPI in appraisals. especially for sales staff and account managers and things like that. And NPS worked on a simple thing like uh, how willing are you to recommend a company or a product to your friends and family or other ones. So it was purely based on recommendation. So the issue there is that nowadays when we think about it, the whole idea of CSAT has undergone a sea change, right? And the question is, what are the ways that you can look at to understand CSAT, right? So a lot of the times, for example, let's say I am a dissatisfied customer, right? There was a time, before social media and technology where I would be on the phone trying to reach out. If I've had an adverse event, if I've had a dissatisfying experience, I would be on the phone trying to get in touch with customer service. Now the tables are turned. All I have to do is tweet, and customer service from that company is going to be falling over themselves, trying to reach out to me like 15 times a day, trying to understand, sir, what is the problem? How can we help? Right? Or they'll simply reply with a tweet saying, hey, TM due, can you please get in touch with us? Right. So the tables have turned now. So in terms of CSAT, the responsiveness, how quickly you are able to respond to the client, how quickly you are able to satisfy with a resolution for the client, right? All of these things have, the it all of these things actually come together to define, customer satisfaction, and the way it needs to be tracked is what the big challenge is, right? Because there'll be some people who will reach out to customer service. There will be some people who simply just put up a negative review, right? So mining reviews, mining social media threads, using natural language processing algorithms to be able to, basically bring out positive, negative, neutral sorts of sentiments, which, guys like Sprinkler and all that do. That's where the key is, mining that data to understand and evolving our thinking around CSAT itself. It's not simply about saying, hey, yes, I'm satisfied, no, I'm dissatisfied, or my rating is, 1 on 5 or 5 on 5. What is driving it? And the key thing is, once I have those qualitative, I can convert a lot of that qualitative information into a quantitative data set, which now allows me to look at it more from a combined thematic element perspective, which helps me with communications, which helps me with product design, which helps me with go-to-market, with a lot of stuff.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vittesh. Uh, from the audience, any questions? I guess we are good. Vittesh. This was a very new topic. Oh yeah, we see your hand raised. Pooja.
Yes. Yes, Pooja.
Yes, thanks, Sai Prateek. Hi, Vitesh. This was a really
Hi.
informative session. I had a question on top of my head ever since we started this session that when it comes to marketing mix modeling, in my previous organization, I always saw like there were annual plans being made. So, for example, if we are in 2023, we used to have a marketing mix modeling done for each of the clients, for example, say GSK, and
Yep.
then we used to kind of have a campaign plan for the year 2024 when we used to sit and say November or October 23.
Yeah.
Do you think this approach works, or it would be a too far-fetched plan when it comes to planning for the entire year because there would be a lot of changes, right? I mean, that's how they used to work, and when I like currently, this is not how we function. So, what do you
Mhm.
think is the best way of having a plan with along with, of course, having an MMM approach to the plan? What do you think is the best way of doing it? Like, should we go campaign wise, or should we have an annual setup always?
I would say somewhere in between, right? Because let's recognize the fact that businesses are dynamic, right? So you can create so using models, you can definitely create, annual operating plans. But in most client organizations, and this is at least true of when it was happening at GSK as well, um, you would do an AOP purely from a strategy setting perspective, right?
Right.
Basically, to understand that broadly speaking, this is what my TV budgets should be. This is broadly what my my media, my TV, print, radio, digital, whatever I'm using, um, roughly what they should be, right?
Right.
Now, while while market mix models can also help you with flighting, right, at the campaign level, the question to ask is, does that there is no uniformity in that flighting, right? So at GSK, typically the way it used to happen was, while there is an AOP which says, broadly speaking, this is budget, blah blah blah, they would do it on a quarterly basis, right? So because the business would know, sales would also know what their monthly and their quarterly targets are, and based on being able to meet those targets, because those targets are set keeping in mind seasonality and a lot of other factors. So there are times when business is down. If you take Pepsi for instance, summer is peak, but then the monsoon times is where it crashes to an annual low. So it may not make sense for them to run any sort of media campaigns around the monsoons. But in summer, crazy, right? So the first half of the year is probably where Pepsi would be utilizing 70% of the budget, and then Q3 is a bit of a lull, and then Q4 onwards, where festivities and all of that starts coming in, and end of the year celebrations and all of those things start coming in. That's when they will start. They will come back and with a bang in terms of their thing. So the thing with the market mix models is that there is, when you look at it on an average, when you look at it on an annual level, there is an averaging factor which kind of comes into play. So the good thing is that your response curves through the market mix models do not change, right? So what holds true for H1 pretty much more or less holds true for H2. So you can use those models for on a quarterly basis, on a half yearly basis, and an annual basis. If you want, you can use it for a monthly basis or at a campaign level as well, just to get an understanding of how that happens. So for MSIL right now, for Maruti Suzuki, that's how we do it, right? Optimization, media mix, and everything for at a campaign level, simply because of the nature of the business. You can structure your models accordingly. So, in a nutshell, to your
Right.
question, uh, I would say that, in a nutshell, annual operating plan, strategic level, right? Uh, Definitely can be used. At a more tactical level, campaign or monthly or quarterly is probably the way you would see more benefit from the other.
Right. Thanks so much, Vitesh.
Thank you, Vitesh. Thank you, Pooja. So, I would like to thank Vitesh for joining us today and shedding light on this very new topic. We are all soaking in the technicalities, trying to understand what MMM is, and of course, it was an eye opener for most of us, and it will help us in our career forward. So, uh, very much thankful to Vitesh, and also thanking everyone who attended the session today. Uh, we can wrap the session. And once again, thank you, one and all.
Right.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
everybody.
much,
The pleasure was
Vittesh.
all mine.
Thank you.
Thank you, and everyone. Have a great day. And by the way, I'm in Densu. So if you want more details, want to talk more, want to brainstorm or something, just reach out. Don't let that stop you. Yep.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everyone.
Vittesh.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vittesh. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vittesh.